But first and foremost, I have to cover a little bit. Now some of this, if you guys are 2.0, 3.0 pet parents or veterinarians, you know this. So I don't want to bore you, but I have to zip through a little bit of the boring stuff for you to see the regulation part of this. So the big question is, thank you, Susan Thixton, for the slide. Susan Thixton runs a nonprofit called Truth About Pet Food. If you don't follow her, follow her. Her heart and soul mission is to provide exactly the information Steve and I are talking about on a giant platform. This is her slide. And I love it because I think it encompasses what's going on with regulation very well. The FDA ultimately is who is responsible for regulating pet food. Their feet on the ground, so to say, are the state ag departments, employees, that every state has state ag department representatives. The state ag department are the people that go from store to store and check guaranteed analysis, make sure that the printing on the bag is exactly what the FDA says it has to be. They also spontaneously or randomly check for pathogens, or maybe not so randomly check for pathogens. But they are the people that are submitting food to try and do quality control, because largely the pet food industry, as you're going to find out, is quite unregulated. The labels are strictly regulated, but what goes in the bag or can or inside of the container isn't. So the state ag department is partnering with the FDA on a state-by-state level. AAFCO and the USDA have no regulatory enforcement over pet food. Now, USDA does have regulatory enforcement in slaughterhouses for human food. So in a slaughterhouse, there's a USDA meat inspector in every slaughterhouse around the US, and they have one of two options. They will either judge every piece of tissue coming before them as inspected past, which means it goes into the human food industry. Producing meat is expensive, and so anything that is of human grade quality is going into human grade market. Now there's a very, very, very small percentage of pet food companies, including Robistro, my estimate is less than 2%, that is buying USDA inspected meat and swinging it back into pet food. But the other option in the USDA slaughter plants is USDA inspected failed or condemned. And all of that condemned meat goes into pet food. And that isn't a problem in the sense that associated with a lot of condemned meat, there may be a tumor or abscess in the middle of that thigh muscle on a cow. The rest of the carcass is beautiful. But the reason it's not going to the human side of things is because there is a flaw. There is infection. There is a problem. There's something that makes it potentially unsafe for human consumption, so it goes into feed. So you're going to hear me say today, food grade, which means approved for human consumption, and you're going to hear me say feed grade. Feed grade is the way that the industry kindly says not approved for human consumption. So we have to just delineate that right up front. AAFCO is a private organization that has members of FDA, Center of Veterinary Medicine, and State Department of Ag, goes to private AAFCO meetings twice a year. Companies, pet food companies, are also allowed to join AAFCO. You pay a lot of money, and you can join this private organization. And AAFCO, as a private agency, no regulatory power, but AAFCO, as an organization, does two big things. They make model laws that they offer to states and say, this is what we think you should take into action. Some states accept AAFCO laws, most do, but some don't. And AAFCO also sets minimum nutrient requirements, which means AAFCO are the people that says, hey, FDA, we've looked at some research, and this is what we think the minimum nutrient requirements are for animals to stay alive. Not necessarily to thrive, but to not die of nutritional deficiency. So that's really the primary purpose of AAFCO. But here's the kicker. AAFCO's definitions, as a private organization, AAFCO owns the definitions that are on the back of all of your pet food bag. It's not what you and I think in terms of chicken. AAFCO has their own private definitions of every ingredient on the back of your pet food bag. And it's not what you think it is. So part of my frustration with AAFCO, am I thankful that we live in a country that has some standards? If we were all in Vietnam right now, they have no nutrition standards. We could feed rice all day and call it a pet food, and you would have no idea. So I'm thankful we are in a modern country with minimum nutrient standards to prevent death from malnutrition, yay. But this is a little shifty, because the average person, all of us sitting in the room as consumers, when we see chicken on the back of a pet food bag, this is what I think. Inspected chicken, no disease, they didn't die of anything gross or disgusting. But when you crack the AAFCO manual, AAFCO has different definitions for what meat is. Meat from mammals is required to be slaughtered, which, let me just summarize that for you. In theory, happy, happy, happy dead, right? The cow can walk off. He can walk, his body is not full of disease, he gets a bullet in the head, he turns from animals to meat. That's what we should all be thinking when we think died by slaughter. Poultry meat does not require animals to be slaughtered. So you should all be thinking, well, if an animal doesn't die by slaughter, how does it die? Well, disease, massacres, all those pigs that flooded out in the last hurricane, the millions of pigs in North Carolina, they went into pet food. But here's the biggest, grossest thing to me. When those of you that know about factory farming, I Googled it this morning, 65 billion chickens will be consumed this year worldwide. 65 billion chickens. Half of those chickens are males. The other half of the chickens are females, and females are, of course, the ones that produce the eggs. So for commercial egg laying, when chickens are born, the first thing that happens in these massive industries is they flip the chicken over and they determine, are you boy, are you girl? If you girl, you go into a 12 by 12 inch cage with a couple other chickens, and you grow up your life eating, laying, and then you go into pet food. If you are a little male chicken, you are macerated. Macerated means you're ground up alive, not by slaughter. And I almost put a video in, it's like, you know what, it's Sunday morning. We don't need mimosas then. Okay, we're not gonna do that. But a lot of the back of the chicken is day-old male chicks that still is made up of chicken, AAFCO's definition of chicken. Well, how fair is that for me and you? It's not fair. This is AAFCO-approved meat. And my frustration should be your frustration. Hence, Susan Thixton, myself, and a class action attorney, we went to Washington, we spoke with the FDA, and we said, listen, we're not trying to tell you, don't use diseased animals in pet food, because we know that that's exactly where all the diseased meat goes into pet food. What we're saying is as consumers, we have a right to know if it's feed grade or food grade. And we have a right to look at a label. So if you're at Walmart, it will say this is feed grade, not approved for human consumption. All we want is transparency so we know what we're feeding. Follow Susan Thixton to be able to keep up with our journey of suing the FDA. But we're not trying to stop the big wheel. The pet food industry is a $60 billion industry. The vast majority of it is runoff from the human food industry. We're not trying to change that. We would fill every landfill in the US in 4 years if people did not feed feed-grade pet food. So we're not trying to stop the wheel. We're trying to inform people so they can make educated decisions. Most upsetting about the FDA is the sneaky little compliance policy that they snuck into law 15 years ago. And what it says is that even though AAFCO says mammals have to die by slaughter, FDA, which is the regulatory body, says no regulatory action will be considered against pet food companies that use animals that have died otherwise by slaughter. So what does that fancy word means for mammals? At this point, with this terrible, sneaky law that got passed, any meat can go into pet food. So this is pork. And when you flip your bag of pet food over and you see pork, this is a pig that died of disease laying out in a pasture for 3 days. That's pork on the back of a pet food bag. And that is unacceptable to me. It's unacceptable to Steve. Not that it goes into pet food, but that it's not labeled appropriately. So we are pushing for label laws. Just 10 days ago, I was in Nova Scotia, and I read the Chronicle Herald. 2.6 million farm salmon died. They were farm-raised salmon. They bloated. They floated to the top of their pen. It took a week. 2.6 million salmon carcasses will be delivered to another company to be processed and turned into cat food. You know, at least they're honest. At least, like this was on the major newspaper in Canada, 2.6 million pounds of dead salmon going into cat food. When pet parents who are not at the seminar buy salmon, they see salmon on the back of the label, they're not thinking dead, bloated, diseased salmon that died in a pen. They're not thinking that, and they have a right to know that.